Hello everyone, welcome back to another benchmark video. Today we are going to test the performance of the game called the first Berserker Khazan. For this test, I am using a GTX 1650 DDR6 model along with an Intel i5 12400 processor and 16 GB of RAM. Additionally, all the components are running at their base clocks, none of them have been overclocked, all the drivers are up to date and background applications have been closed. Let's get started. As we open the game, we see a prompt warning about the low VRAM, which we will ignore for the purposes of this test. Starting with the low preset, we see frame rates above 60 FPS, which is our target FPS, occasionally reaching up to 80 FPS. During cutscenes, the frame rates increase even more, hitting around 100 FPS at times. In terms of graphics quality, the game looks decent on the low preset, edges around the characters are well defined and sharp. However, lighting quality is low and shadows are almost as disabled. The good news is that the game remains playable.
I'll claim you now. Do you feel it? The energy of the netherworld. That is what flows through you. Now, join with us.
As we progress through the fights, frame rates drop slightly, hovering in the mid-70s. Inside caves, frames increase lying between 80 and 110 FPS. There are few spikes in the frame time graphs during transition between different regions or effect changes, but these have a negligible impact on gameplay. Next, we move on to the medium preset. We notice an improvement in the graphics quality. Now we can see the shadows of the vegetation, although they remain soft. The colors look better and the lighting has more depth. However, the performance takes a hit and we see frame rates dropping below 60 FPS, sticking close to the mid-50s with a 1% low of 30 FPS. During cutscenes, the frame rates remains largely the same, although there are spikes in the frame time graphs with no significant impact.
The power of death cannot claim you now. Do you
In combat, frame rates range from 50 to 70 FPS with a 1% low of 30 FPS. Inside the caves, we observe better depth and texture around the stones, with frame rates varying between 60 to 80 FPS and a 1% low of 31 FPS. When we enable FSR in quality mode, we immediately notice a decline in pixel density, resulting in softer and blurrier texture overall. The character appears more jagged and even the shadows become jagged. However, in terms of performance, we see a significant boost, achieving nearly double the frames, reaching over 90 FPS without FSR. During cutscenes, the frame rates often crosses the 100 FPS mark with a 1% of 40 FPS. Here, we can observe a frame time spike, but it does not seem to impact overall performance.
The power of death cannot claim you now. Do you
In combat situations, the FPS stays above 100 FPS, never dropping below this mark, resulting in a 1% low of 44 FPS. Inside the cave, as expected, performance improved, with frames reaching a maximum of 143 FPS and a 1% of 44 FPS. Next, let's look at the high preset without FSR. As anticipated, the image quality is better with a clearer shadow and more detailed dynamic vegetation. However, this comes at the cost of performance, with frame rates ranging between 40 to 50 fps and 1% low of 3 fps. During cutscenes, frames are similar, occasionally reaching the mid-50s, and there are some frame time spikes.
The power of death cannot claim you now. Do you feel it?
In between fights, there are no major change in performance. With a 1% low of 24 fps, the frame time graphs appear more uniform with fewer spikes. Inside the cave, frames reach 60 fps for the first time, sticking close to 60 fps with a 1% low of 28 fps. Overall, the game remains playable at this performance level and with improved image quality. Some frame spikes may be expected during the transition into larger areas. Moving on to FSR quality, at the high preset, we again notice a decline in image quality, resulting in a softer and more jagged appearance. In terms of performance, we can expect a gain of 5 to 10 fps with a 1% low of 14 fps. During cutscenes, frames even exceed the 70 fps mark, staying close to the higher 60s with a 1% low of 35 fps.
The power of death cannot claim you now.
While fighting, frames remain consistently above the 60 fps mark with a 1% low of 37 fps. In the cave area, frame rates increase even further, ranging between 60 to 80 fps with a 1% low of 37 fps. For the sake of brevity in this video, I didn't include the performance with FSR set to balanced at the high preset, but I did test it offline. During that test, frames stayed consistently between 60 to 90 fps. However, the game appeared much softer and ghosting was noticeable around the character, which is not ideal in terms of quality. Moving on to the final preset of the game, which is the max preset without FSR. The visuals significantly improve with the well-defined shadows, texture, and enhanced lighting. The atmosphere becomes much more denser as compared to the lower preset. In terms of performance, at the beginning, the frame rates range between 30 to 50 fps with a 1% of 4 fps. During cutscenes, the performance remains similar, but the frame time graphs shows larger spikes.
The power of death cannot claim you now.
During combat scenes, frames typically stay above the 40 fps mark with a 1% low of 26 fps. However, we notice greater variation in the frame time graphs during the kill effects. Inside the cave, we expected the frames to reach 60 fps, but they stay above 50 fps with a 1% low of 27 fps without reaching 60 fps.
Now you too will hear the memories of.
When we set FSR to quality at the max preset, the game visually appears acceptable. In terms of FPS, frames exceed the 50 fps mark and remain above it with a 1% of 20 fps. During cutscenes, frames temporarily surpass 60 fps but drop back to 50 fps during gameplay with a 1% of 33 fps.
Death cannot claim you now.
During fights, frames typically range from 50 to 60 fps with a 1% of 34 fps. Inside the cave area, frame rates finally exceed 60 fps, even reaching 75 fps with a 1% of 35 fps. Finally, when we set FSR to balanced at max preset, the game looks nearly identical to FSR quality settings, though there is slight more ghosting around the character. In terms of performance, frames reach 60 fps mark at the start with a 1% of 5 fps. During cutscenes, frame rates range between 60 to 80 fps with a 1% of 31 fps, and the frame time spikes occur at regular intervals during these cutscenes.
That is what flows through you. Now
While fighting, frame rates lie in the target range of 60 to 70 FPS for the most of the time, with a 1% low of 37 FPS. Inside the cave, the frame range increases, lying between 60 and 80 FPS with a 1% of 38 FPS. In conclusion, when considering gameplay and combat mechanics, the game performs fine and is enjoyable to play, with the ability to reach over 60 FPS at various settings. So the question is whether you should buy the game or not. I would say if you enjoy Dark Souls type games with an anime style aesthetic and elements similar to Black Myth Wukong, then you should definitely go for it. If you like this video, please make sure to subscribe to the channel and I will see you guys in the next video.